Hello, and welcome to Yogahub Podcast, where we bring you conversations with some of the world's leading yoga and movement educators. In this episode, I'm chatting to Nico Luce. Nico has been teaching yoga around the world for over 20 years, and in that time, he's become one of the foremost teacher trainers in both vinyasa yoga and yin yoga. In this conversation, we talk a little bit about Nico's background, his approach to yoga in general, but also teacher training specifically, the importance of community in yoga, and the importance of balancing yin and yang. Nico is coming to our Cannon Street studio in Dublin to host a yin teacher training, which is taking place over 2 weekends, the 13th and 14th of April and the 4th and 5th of May. You can find out more information on this and other trainings at our studios at yogahub.ie/workshops. Hope you enjoy this conversation with Nico. Thank you very much for listening. So first of all, Nico, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to have this conversation. I first met you, I'm not sure if you remember this, but I first met you, I'm going to say maybe 6 years ago at this stage. It was quite early on in my my teaching career. And I was lucky enough to sit in on a teacher training day that you did with us here at the Yoga Hub in Dublin. And I'd met you a couple of days before, but I always remember, so it was a 10-month course, and anyone who's done like a 10-month teacher training course will know that you make a lot of lovely friendships, and that kind of community social aspect of it is such a huge part. And so sometimes at the beginning of a day, there can be a lot of energy, there can be a lot of excitement, people are catching up and they're happy to see all their friends and stuff. So there can be a bit of energy in the room. And I always remember that you came in, and rather than trying to grab people's attention or get everyone to kind of almost like a headmaster, kind of trying to get everyone to settle down, you just came into the room and you just sat down and you closed your eyes. And it took a few moments, but over the few moments that you were sitting there, everyone began to gradually okay, the day is beginning, the Nico's here, and sort of gradually everyone just settled down and did the same thing. They just sat down and they closed their eyes. And in the space of a few minutes, from it being a sort of very energetic room, it just shifted into a very peaceful room, kind of simply just through your presence. And it's something that's always stuck with me as a little reminder to me, at least, that obviously the things that we say and the things that we share are incredibly important, but it's often the energy of the teacher that resonates with people most. So yeah, that's always something that's kind of stuck in my mind and been a big inspiration for me, I have to say. So thank you for that. And first and most importantly, maybe the most important question of the day is, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a little pause in the middle of the day to talk with you and to reconnect, and I love that story. I think I had forgotten it. It seems that going into stillness and silence is still a revolutionary thing. And you can get people's attention, especially when everybody's being really loud.
Oh, you did very well that day, I have to say. So for anyone who maybe doesn't know you super well yet, I thought it'd be nice to begin by you just giving a little bit of background to yourself, your journey with practicing yoga, and maybe your journey with teaching it as well. So yeah, and as little or as much detail as you'd like to share, you might let us know a little bit about yourself.
Mm-hmm. So, where do I start? I started when I started with yoga. I went to India in 1999 I went traveling in Asia and Southeast Asia, and I went to India, and I practiced a little bit of yoga, but it was a first encounter or a second encounter. And then in 2001, we moved to Vancouver with my wife, and I started practicing yoga regularly, and I fell in love with it. I was much younger back then, and it really spoke to me. I was looking for something like that, something that integrated body, mind and spirit, something to do with being present and stillness and all the stuff that we heard about. And so in 2003, I started teaching yoga at a rec center in North Vancouver, and I've been teaching yoga ever since. Now, I lived in Canada until 2013. Then we moved to Europe with my wife and two kids that now they're adults, young adults. And we lived in Switzerland for the last 10 years. And then for the last year and something and a half almost, we moved to the south of France, and we are restoring an 18th century property. And we run yoga retreats here in the summer, and during the rest of the year, I still travel teach, much less than I used to, because this has been a big part of our project, and I'm putting a lot of time here. But yeah, that's about me. I teach. I practice mostly vinyasa yoga and yin and meditation and pranayama. I mean, at some point, everything is just the practice. And yeah, that's enough about me for now.
And so what style of yoga did you originally begin with? And you spoke to the kind of body, mind, spirit connection. Was that the first thing that kind of grabbed you into the practice, or was that something that you gradually began to realize? Because I know for a lot of people, maybe a lot of men, although it's a generalization, it's often mainly the physical aspect that we engage with first of all. Was that the case for you, or was it the holistic nature of it straight away?
I guess there was always a part of me that was looking for that. The body, the mind, and the spirit, I had experience of all three, or practices of all three, but they were usually done in separate different spaces. And one was done in sports club, and the other one in school, and the other one, I don't know, church, or it doesn't have to be a religious thing either. When I graduated from high school, I started engineering, and at the same time, I started drama school. I don't know, I wanted to develop two parts of myself, my creativity and also my mind and my intellect. And so that's why when I was 25 and I really got into yoga, to me was finding in that one place all three aspects, because it was very clear that although the class, I started with my very first class of yoga ever was with Indra Devi in Buenos Aires in Argentina. She's a legend. I didn't know really how much of a legend she is at the time. I just went to a class because she was actually a popular figure in Argentina. She would do TV shows and stuff. So I said one day I would like to give it a try to a yoga class. So I went to her studio, which was like blocks away from where I lived, and I did the class, and it was a hatha yoga class. And I walked away thinking that yoga was not really for me, because the class was really slow paced. I think she was sitting in a corner and she would just call the name of the poses in Sanskrit. And there was an assistant or a co-teacher explaining in Spanish the form of the pose, and very chill, like child's pose and really sweet poses. And I was like 19. I fell asleep probably in every pose, like I still do in classes when I'm not teaching. So I walked away thinking, well, no, that's not really for me, actually. Like my body felt okay, but there was, I missed out on so much. It wasn't until I was 25 that I really started getting into yoga. And funny enough, it was a Bikram studio at the time. And I had never done hot yoga. But there was something about not just the one teacher that taught that very first class that I went to, but the teachers that were chosen to teach at that studio, that they were all teaching something else than the 26 poses twice in a 40-degree room. They were yeah, there was something integrated. What we were talking about, the body, definitely a challenging physical practice with the mind, because there was so much detail on how to get into poses and how to hold it, and also the insights that they were bringing into it. So I finished that first Bikram class, and the studio owner, the studio had just opened in North Vancouver, Canada, and the studio owner came to talk to me and my wife and said, "So did you like it?" And I looked at her and I said, "Oh my God, I think I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life." She was like, "Really?" And it was like, "Yeah, really. I've been looking for something like this. This was fantastic." So I did Bikram for about a year until someone, I think my wife was again, said, "Hey, there's another class going on with this great teacher. It's a different style of yoga. It's vinyasa yoga." And I had no idea what vinyasa yoga was. And I went to that first class, and again, I fell in love with it. I think that I stopped doing hot yoga altogether, and I got into vinyasa, and then from vinyasa, I got into Ashtanga, and then from Ashtanga that I practiced and taught for several years, I started hurting myself through the practice and getting injured or repetitive stress in my joints. So then I discovered, well, I went to Iyengar yoga classes, to attend Iyengar yoga classes, to really learn how to the intelligence of the mind to the practice, and that was so insightful. And from there, I migrated to Anusara, which in the 2000s, the end of the 2000s, had become really big in North America. And I started with John Friend, and Yin was always part of the practice that I taught and I practiced. So yeah, so it's hard after 20 something years practicing and teaching. It's hard. Sometimes I get people, it's like, "So, but what's your yoga practice?" And it's really hard now to start separating, because I think I kind of like integrate everything into, at least into my personal practice. Of course, when I'm teaching a public class or a training, specific training, yes, I can be more vinyasa style or yin style, but the practice itself, yeah, I don't think it has a style.
It's interesting and really lovely to hear you talk about your background. And I actually had a very similar experience to you, that one of the first ever yoga classes I went to, I was living in Australia at the time, and I went with my sister, who was also living there, and I was like incredibly stiff, like couldn't do anything, struggled with. I always remember the first time I heard a teacher say, "Fold from your hips." It was like they were speaking in Chinese. Like, it just didn't make any sense to me what that could even possibly mean. But it was such a lovely experience at the same time. And I remember leaving and walking home with my sister. And I said pretty much the exact same thing. I said, I think I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. Obviously with no concept of teaching or whatever, becoming any kind of career, but just the practice itself. Because I just felt like 3 inches taller. And it's nice hearing your kind of path through the different styles, because I think for anyone who sticks with the practice, obviously some people will practice Ashtanga for 20 years, but a lot of people will kind of migrate and pick up the little bits from the different styles that resonates with them, the discipline of Ashtanga, the precision of Iyengar, the fluidity of Vinyasa, or whatever it might be. And I guess for you, over that transition, is there any, I guess, big takeaways, or if you were to go back to yourself when you were first starting 20 years ago, would you give yourself any advice? Would you take any different routes, or, yeah, I guess what's your big takeaway from that 20-year journey?
It's just that, no, of course, where I am is a result of where I've been. So it's to look back and say, well, I wouldn't have done that. It's like, but then I wouldn't be where I am. So No, I think, they say that I love that expression, the fool that persists in his folly will become wise. That if you really persist and you insist and you are committed to whatever you're doing, eventually you're going to get to the right place, even if you're doing the wrong thing in a way. None was a waste. When I try to live by the principle that everything that happens is a teaching for me, doesn't happen to me. And then all the things that I did and the injuries that I had along the way, they taught me so much, and I live with them. Not that I live injured, not anymore, but I injured myself several times, and some of them were like bad. Yet if you can own the mistakes, if you can own the injury, if you can own the making the wrong decision, well, then you're making the right decision, and it helps. I would encourage people. I tell people all the time, just try any class. Especially people that study with me. At the end of the training, is like, now go and explore other teachers. Go and, because you can add so much more. You even if you, some practices. For example, a clear example, when the first time that I went to a Yin yoga class, I had been practicing Ashtanga for years and I was getting really strong and then I went to a Yin class and a friend of mine was teaching it. And I had such a hard time. I struggled so much. I hated it. I really did. And when the class ended, the teacher said, "So, how did it go?" And I was like, "To be honest, you're an amazing teacher, but I just had a terrible time." And she said, "Oh, that's great. Come back in 2 days." I was like, "No, I really didn't like it." And it's like, "I know. That's how it is, like what is it that you didn't like?" I was like, "I didn't like bitching for 3 minutes. 3 minutes bitching is hard for me." It's like, "Yeah, I know. Okay, cool. See you in 2 days." I was like, okay. And then it took me a while to understand the whole point of like, okay, and so what? Like, yes, it is challenging, and yes, it is. And then you start softening to that, and something that was not a good thing became a thing that I really enjoy, and I love teaching it too, and I love practicing. So many times the first experience may be an awful experience too, and the remedy doesn't always taste good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very, very true.
So no changes. I love the way everything unfolded. Yeah.
Good. And how long did it take you to persist with Yin? Was it after a couple of classes, or did you have to stick with it that little bit longer?
I still find in my personal Yin practice resistance, actually. And it's no longer mental resistance. It's not that, oh my God, I don't want to be here, or how long in the pose. None of that. My mind is kind of like, oh, cool, like challenge. Okay, cool. But I find pockets in my body. For example, I may carry tension in my belly sometimes, or in my throat, or in my face, or in my tongue. So yeah, you still find I still resist. I still get myself in the way, and as I do of the mat in my life. And then it's like, okay, and I'm becoming aware of that. The moment that I find those little pockets of like resistance and just softening into that, and it's like, okay, cool. So it's an ongoing process, as you can tell. But that's the beauty of it, and it's the counterpart of getting stronger, because isn't that if you're in the building strength, you're also challenging to the point of like, can I hold it for another breath too? Can I stay a little longer, or can I? For example, if you're doing headstand, for example, can I find that fine tuning, and then it becomes easy. But fine tuning it is not always easy, because we need to correct our patterns, and then it does become easy. So it's similar to that. One is about endurance, and the other one is about surrender. And one is about the determination, and the other one is about the letting go. And they're both so important. So both the yin and the yang, and great practices, great complements. It's becoming also very hard to separate them. So when I teach vinyasa, we always end the day with yin, and people, although we came to a vinyasa training, they end up loving yin. And the same happens with a yin training. People come for yin, and then we need to move, because if it's yin all week, we get really like energetically. So it is such a great balance.
And it's really nice to hear you speak to the, I guess, continuing resistance and continuing challenge, because sometimes, I don't know whether it's due to marketing or just, I don't know, passion for a practice, but you'll often hear people mostly just talking about how great it is and how all the benefits you're going to get. And, but to hear someone as experienced as you still speak to the resistance and that it's not all, you know, sunshine and rainbows, that you do have to surrender to the challenge in a lot of ways, is, I think, a really important point to make, and a point that maybe will help validate other people's kind of feelings that, like, okay, I'm in this class, but and everyone talks about how amazing it is, but I'm actually not really enjoying this. It's, in some sense, that is the practice.
Mm-hmm. So that is the practice, actually. I think that is the practice. The practice is the yes to what is. And if we take it back to sitting in silence, doing nothing, call it meditation or whatever you want to call it, it's not that it feels good. What feels good is to feel. The feeling itself may not always be a pleasant one. And it doesn't have to, because connecting to allowing, creating the space to connect with a feeling that is happening in my heart, and doesn't have to be approved or validated or good, right? Like if you're connected with whatever is happening in your personal life or in your family or in your community or in the world at large. And sometimes every time I sit with all that. And I have many feelings that often not pleasant ones. But it's so great to allow myself to feel, actually. And sometimes you cry it out, or sometimes you just watch it and you just let it be. And it reminds you that, okay, I'm a sentient human being. Here I am. And I'm affected by it, and I don't have to resolve it. I don't have to do anything. I just allow myself to feel this, and even if it's really uncomfortable, especially when it is, that's the feeling that it becomes a teacher in that sense.
And for someone who has been in the yoga industry, for want of a better word, and I know it can be tricky because even though we speak to a yoga industry, obviously everyone is still very much in their, you know, it's not like everyone gets together and chats about it every week. People are working in yoga. It's kind of a lot of diverse and different people sort of all in a similar area. But for someone who has been in the yoga industry, again, for want of a better word, for a long time, is there anything major you've noticed that has changed over the last 20 years or so in terms of how people approach the practice, or even approach like the business side of yoga in terms of running studios and the impact of COVID? And have you noticed much of a change over these 20 or so years?
Yeah. What do I know? Honestly, I think I know less and less, although I've been in it and part of it, the yoga community, and I love it because it sounds like when there's an industry, you imagine like a few big shots getting together and making decisions, and it's exactly the opposite of what yoga is, because there's no organization behind it. So it's very fluid, it's very spontaneous too. Instead of the differences, I'm still surprised by the common things, actually. Maybe earlier on, 10 years ago, I would have noticed more differences. Now I notice, I'm getting that old, that I notice what it has in common. And what it has in common is that any community, any studio that I go to, when the studio is run by real people that love what they do and they put the heart into it, it creates a vibrant community, regardless of the style that they teach, regardless of how fancy or how simple the studio is. That is the common thing. That is the one common thing. The other common thing is how people from all walks of life, all ages, they practice together. That is still, of course, there are more trends. If you say, well, in North America, perhaps there's a greater majority of a more balance between genders and that in Europe. But at the same time, no. 2 weeks ago, I taught a drop-in class at a yoga studio on a Friday night in Geneva, and it was so surprising because it was exactly that. It was like people from, I don't know, late teens to early 60s, and on a Friday night, and they just came for a yoga class, and some of them, they didn't know exactly what style of yoga we were going to do, and that thing is, it died off with COVID. It was really hard on the industry because, yes, people were not coming. But what I noticed is that people are coming back for the same reason as me 20-something years ago, going to a place where like, oh my God, like there was something for all parts of me in this one place. So that is still happening. That perhaps, but I wouldn't be able to tell, perhaps is happening more because we've been isolated. And then coming back and doing things in person and reconnecting, and also because we became more and more hooked on devices, and how much of our life really is through devices, for good and for bad. So now going back to a common room where devices are not for an hour and a half, 2 hours, is becoming a radical thing. And it's so good. So the common things are this. I would say that the practice of yoga is bulletproof. The industry is going to go through ups and downs, but the practice has been going on for a very long time. When we connect to that space within ourselves that we go home, and it's a friendly space, it works.
And on I'm kind of interested in a personal level for you. For again, I don't mean to keep mentioning how long you've been teaching and stuff for, but as someone with a lot of experience and who has taught an awful lot, to hear that you still teach like drop-in classes on a Friday evening, I find there's something so sweet about that. And I guess I'm curious to the kind of continuing motivation to teach just regular classes, and how you feel on a personal level. Like, is it just second nature now, or is it something that do you still feel a little bit nervous, or do you still if you wouldn't mind speaking to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I love those drop-in classes because I almost never teach them. I haven't had a regular yoga studio class since I left Canada in 2013. So it's been, many years, 11 years. So, but I do teach the majority of my time. I'm teaching teacher trainings. So they're like 7.5, 8-hour days where I teach dropping. People can drop into those early morning classes. They are usually 2.5-hour longs. We do meditation, pranayama, and asana. And so I hold long classes, what before I used to call work, but it would have been a workshop, but I do them every day as part of teacher training, and I finish the day with Yin, and I'm teaching anatomy. And so the format and the intensity and the level of the discussion with smaller groups, with 15, 20 people, but we share the ride together. So we get really, yeah, we go deep and we touch on many aspects. So every now and then when a studio says, for example, I was teaching in Lausanne and a student in Geneva said, come teach a yoga class on a Friday night. I was like, yeah, sure. I had taught all day, by the way. I started teaching at 7:30 in the morning. This was 6:30 in the afternoon. And I was so excited because I know what it is to teach that 1 hour, 90-minute class that you don't know who's coming. And it's a Friday. I personally thought no one is going to be there. Friday night at 6:30 in Geneva. Actually, there were 36 people in the class, and it was a great time. To me, when I teach those, a 60-minute class, to me, it goes by super fast. It's almost like I need to stick to a plan because I teach longer formats. So it's like, no, and now we're like 3-minute little talk and we're going to move and I stick to the plan. And for a 90-minute, I have to say too, and I love that. I love that we can be a little lighter, that we can be, or sometimes we go, because you only have 90 minutes, you can, that was a sweaty experience and we were just like killing it Friday night. So I love how spontaneous it can be. Do I get nervous? A little bit. Not nervous. I get excited. I still get excited. I'm only going to keep teaching for as long as I get excited. Nowadays, I don't get excited going to places because I'm really tired of the commute. I travel way too much in my life, but I get excited being in places. So I have to endure the flying too, and that's okay. I'm doing it way less, but I still love being in another city and meeting people and being together for a week, diving into the teachings of yoga. It's every single time is wow. I learned so much. I get so much from it. I get so inspired. So yeah.
I've been lucky enough to, like yourself, teach on teacher trainings and workshops, and the opportunity to really go into detail on topics is such a lovely opportunity and a really interesting and rewarding thing. But similar to yourself, I still love just the 60-minute 6:15 on a Tuesday evening classes. Something just about the ritual and the I don't know. There's something about that's really, really special. And I think sometimes I would have gone through stages of being like frustrated by the shortness of it, and like, oh, every practice should be 90 minutes, 2 hours. Like, to try and fit a yoga practice into an hour can sometimes feel like a challenge. But even just something in the relatively short nature of it, it's just such a lovely experience with when the energy in the room is right. And I don't know, something about just like the ritual is similar to yourself. I think as long as I'm teaching, I think I'll love those little evening classes. There's just something so nice about them.
Mm-hmm. The fact that also is so spontaneous, we don't know who's going to be there, yet we know that whoever is there will affect the overall energy anyways. And how those classes in particular, when you're on your side, that you're on the inside of the studio and it becomes so vibrant. That is it's such a gift to be invited to be part of it, at least just once. I miss that. I truly do. I come and go. I stay with people for a week and then I see them in 6 months or a year. And it's never going to be the same group. Yet the regular thing of being at the studio and the regularity that you just mentioned of the practice, the ritual of it is so rich.
And as well, this is not obviously just the case for yoga. But as you said, sometimes you can have, let's say, 20 to 30 people in a room, and it'll be all different ages, all different body types, all different motivations, but everyone there for the same underlying reason of they just want to do something good for themselves. And it's not all that often, I guess, that you're in that setting with just a group of diverse people, but all just wanting to do something good for themselves. And it's such a privilege as a teacher, or even just as a, not even just, but as a student, to be in that atmosphere. It's such a lovely thing.
Mm-hmm. Such a lovely thing. Yes.
So to touch upon teacher trainings, because as you said, that's kind of what you're mostly doing now, and something you've done for a while. I'd love to know, because obviously there is different types of trainings that can be done, whether it's vinyasa, yin, longer, shorter. But what to you makes a good training? And maybe similar to the question I asked earlier, what are the kind of lessons you've learned from hosting trainings over the years?
So what makes a good training is the group, the participants. Definitely. The motivation, what brings them to that place, the wanting to dig in, to go inside in order to connect to the practice from the inside. And then there's the other aspect of training, which is from that experience on the inside, now you lead someone into their own personal inside experience. So there's a part of looking inside, and there's a part of from inside now communicate to the outside, the communication part. So I guess that's the thing of the training. And it's definitely on, because I offered the same material and it's only me teaching it. So the only variable is the group. And that's why I say that then the group makes it a great training. And one thing that we do in the trainings that I offered, there's always space for, well, in a 200-hour format, everybody has to teach in order to graduate, and also for the 300-hour, to complete the 300-hour, you have to teach. It's not optional. But for when I teach in modules, I open up the space, if we have time, for anybody who wants to actually teach for 15, 20 minutes. Sometimes it's half an hour. Now you teach us, teach to your peers, and it's a safe space. And so what do I get? I get great classes. I get to take great classes. I ask people to take risks, to challenge themselves as teachers, to try something that perhaps is a little too far too soon in a yoga class. But with us, it's like, we're weird already, so you're not going to spook us out. Don't worry about it. Try it out with us. And so, yes, every time. So such insightful experience. I think the best classes that I have ever taken in my life were in theater training, hands down. Best moments of truth, moments of someone connecting to their personal truth. And that impresses me much more than a master class with a popular teacher. Mm-hmm. But perhaps because I don't know the popular teacher as well, and I haven't seen the journey of the popular teacher. But by the time they get popular, sometimes it becomes something that is more generic. And I love the authenticity of someone speaking their truth, even if it speaks only to one. You know, ideally, truth is universal, but if one person made a truthful connection, wow. There's so many things being said and shown all the time and everywhere in all media, and they mean nothing. And if someone can walk away with, and if I can be the lucky one walking away with a truthful experience, that's all right. That's wow. Mm-hmm. And that happens in training a lot.
So, because obviously the structure and the material of a training is like very, very important. So I guess, how do you strike that balance between the detailed kind of, I don't know, very not intellectual necessarily, but the literal, whether it's anatomy, teaching methodology, whatever, and then structuring it in a way where you're really just trying to bring something out of the group that they don't have to learn by I don't know, like memorize how you teach or whatever it is? How do you strike that balance between detail and expression, I guess would be my question.
Yeah, great question. Number one is if a training is driven, what makes a training great is the group, and it is driven by the students, is then to make space in the training for this for people to ask questions, and even to question everything, to question themselves, to question me, to question the content, to question everything. So one of the little rituals that I have is that I start not every practice, but every lecture after practice with question time. Do you have any questions on anything up to this point? And sometimes we sit awkwardly for, I don't know, 10 to 15 seconds. And then we move on if no one has a question. But because we start with that and I do it on a regular basis, it became something that, yes, there are topics of conversation. And then that is one of the ways for me to stay more in tune and connected to what individuals are going through in the training, their personal inquiry. The other little trick is to continue tracing parallels. So in what is very right brain, left brain, in what is analytical and 2 + 2, and what is more creative, what is linear thinking, and what is abstract thinking. And to have the two, because both for learning and also for teaching, we want to appeal to all different learning modalities. And some people are really good at learning by following instructions. Everybody that goes to a yoga class really is quite good at following oral instructions, but some students are more visual learners, and some people learn through metaphors, and some people learn through an emotional connection and the tone of your voice, and a smile, or a gentle touch, or a how are you doing. So when we are getting into practical examples, when we are having philosophical discussions, my questions always go back to how do we put this into practice in our lives? And if we're getting into something that is very anatomical, what does this mean actually? What other in which other aspects in our lives can this play out? For example, you could be talking about biomechanics and how to use the anatomical language, colloquial language, people can understand it, can follow it, but to refine what you do inside the yoga pose, not just what it looks like on the outside, but what are the mechanics on the inside. Which muscles are you turning on? Which muscles are you stretching? What muscles are you relaxing? And so how does that play out into other aspects of our lives? What other aspects of our lives we actually need to really engage in order to create an opening? So the student, the participant, and even when we take a yoga class, as a participant in a yoga class, we are is a monologue, is a teacher's monologue, and one is following. But actually what is happening is a bit of a dialogue in which one is doing the voicing of it and the other one is doing the embodying. So the communication is always happening. And in the art of teaching is learning how to communicate when you are being the voice, and through your voice, seeing how someone embodies the practice. And that is so beautiful. Refining the way we describe it, and people can refine the way they execute it, is such an insightful thing. One of the commonalities of training, it impressed me when I took my teacher trainings too, was to discover actually the power of voice, the power of words, the power of talking to a group of people and saying, inhale, lift your arms up, and people actually do it. for many people is something really new. As a parent, for example, imagine if you could say this to your children or to your pets or to anyone in your life, pretty much. But when you go to a yoga class, people are so willing, it's such a, take a deep breath in and we chant together and we sound together. And that happens kind of like immediately. It's kind of like, that's how we roll. That is so special. It is so empowering. And when you witness someone that for the first time teaching a yoga class, perhaps to the group inside the training, and you ask them, so how did it go? They tell you, I couldn't believe it that I was just talking and people were doing what I was saying. That's impressive.
I always say to people in our trainings, you need to be careful because it's a bit of a weird feeling when you say, inhale, lift your arms, and a room full of like 30 people just do it. And, it can go to your head a little bit if you don't know how to ground yourself.
Yes. Yeah, so right.
One thing I'd be interested in for someone who teaches yin and vinyasa, how do you find the balance between the biomechanics and the, let's say, literal, in a certain position, you want your scapula to be doing a certain thing. And then the yin intention, where it's not so much about shape, it's not so much about exact positioning, it's more about feeling. How do you marry those? Not that they're necessarily contradictory approaches, but how do you marry those two approaches?
No, I don't find the yin and the yang approach, I don't find them contradictory. The yang approach is skill in action, is skillful action, an action that is well executed and precise and individualized too, because I'm not suggesting that everybody should be doing the same thing in the same exact way, but yes, something similar that applies to their own anatomy. Well, yin is the opposite of, it is actually the softening, and it is the surrendering, and it's the trusting that without you, it's going to be fine too, actually. So for example, when I teach yang practices, vinyasa, and we get into biomechanics and proper alignment and stuff like that, I always remind people, but what I'm saying applies to the average body, and nobody has the average body. Everybody's like wider and taller and thicker. And so you need to really adapt it to your own body and to your own mobility and to your own injuries and all that. Similar, when we do in the yin practice, we have a general form as well of the pose. Yet you kind of like need to, and that is I find that yin is so, the subtleties of yin are so, wow, deep. And because in a way you have to trust that your body, when you soften, if yin is about the non-doing and releasing the action, well, then you let gravity take over, and you let gravity take over in the way that your body wants to move, or that joint actually wants to move. And it may not be the same as you did on the other side. And in the yang practice, we are trying to equalize it and to make it balanced. And in the yin, we have to trust that no, actually, you cannot address asymmetries in your body through symmetrical work. So then you have to trust that this is the way to go for as long as there's no pain. So they're exactly the opposite, but they're perfectly complementary, I find. The difference is the norm. Difference is the norm. In everybody is different, so difference is the norm. How do you teach a practice where everybody's going to use the same teaching in a different way? Well, then you need to allow room for exploration, both in the yang, as to should I engage more here or soften there, or in the yin practice. It's like, should I allow my body to actually go that way, like that far? And it's like, well, I don't know. Slow. Mm-hmm. Very insightful, both of them. And in my own personal journey, I have to say that in times where my practice was very, very young, well, I was getting stiffer, both physically and also like there were times where like I needed like a lot of like, okay, go this way and keep on, and other times in my life where I needed like, no, now I need to actually to soften, way soften, because I went too far the other way. So it's like a pendulum is a dance.
I love that you use the word trust, because for me, the Yang practices, let's say, taught me a lot about learning how to control my body, to get more stable, to get more stronger. But the softer practices, the Yin practices, whether that is literal Yin or restorative yoga or certain types of breath work, let's say, were also a really good way to learn me how to a good way for me to learn how to trust my body a little bit more. And that I don't always have to be controlling. I don't always have to be pushing. That sometimes it's okay to give way to the intelligence within. And I think for a lot of us, actually, the control, whether or not we're physically capable of doing certain things, the control aspect comes easier. The idea of like, okay, now I have a thing to do. I need to put my arm exactly here. I need to do this with my hip, whatever it is. But the idea of actually trusting yourself to do a little bit less is often more challenging, even though in theory it's more simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we're not always encouraged to trust ourselves. Because like, are we to be trusted? Like in every other level of education that I had, I wasn't supposed to be trusted. We were policed into, and even to the point of like, and now you have to prove that you learn all this stuff. When in yoga, you don't have to. You show up to practice, actually. It's always a practice, and it's never the final exam, because it's always practice. You practice. You just practice. And so the trusting part, also trusting that some things are going to be beneficial for you and some things won't be. And your personal practice is going to give you, either through injury or pain or through healing on the other side, guidelines on how to use this practice. When I was getting, because I tend more towards action, more towards vinyasa, trusting myself in the Yin practice was trusting that there were poses that were actually very beneficial for me into softening and surrendering, while there were other poses where, through, for example, healing injuries, I shouldn't do. And I learned that those poses were actually not good for me. I teach Yin, and I love the Yin practice, and I practice, but I don't do every single family of poses in the Yin. For example, I don't do a lot of passive forward bending. It's not good for my lower back and my pelvis, because I had an injury years ago. Now it's getting much better. Well, if I do the same pose in a Yang way, if I engage my muscles, really healing. If I completely soften, the fascia in my lower back doesn't like it. And I learned that from my personal practice. So when I'm teaching, do I teach passive forward bending? I'm cautious, and I teach people how to stop themselves from going too deep into it. And I also tell them, like, just so you know, I cannot do poses like this one. Well, there are other poses that are beneficial for my practice. Even just trusting that you know, trusting that my body will let me know too. And to stay very much in tune, both in the active Yang practice precise and in the practice of softening. What is the impact of this practice in my body, mind, spirit? What is it doing? Is it helping me out? Is it beneficial? In which way? Asking all those questions, because one thing that I learned over time is that really not everything works for everybody, and even if it works for someone, it may not work all the time.
It's I guess again sort of speaks a little bit to your journey through the different styles and the different modalities, and I think it's similar for a lot of people as well. If you stick with the practice, is learning how to adapt to your own personal needs. And that's something I think that just in life and practice comes with experience, and this idea that, as you were saying, there's no one size fits all, and there's no one practice that is perfect for every single person. There's no, and you have to, I guess, give yourself the agency to, as you were saying before in your trainings, again, question certain things. That, passive forward folds as part of yin practice doesn't mean that means everybody does the passive forward folds all the time. But I guess allowing yourself to not be, because I think, and maybe sometimes with injuries with the yoga in certain ways, can come from persisting with things that you maybe know are not that good for you, but for one reason or other you feel obliged to continue to practice in that way. But I think with maturity in your practice, allowing yourself to actually step back from things that might be central to a certain style of yoga, but actually this doesn't really work for me. But I think for a lot of us, it takes a little while to get to that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So let's give people that permission, that space right from the beginning. Right from the beginning. So one of the things I say every time I teach a public class is like, listen, I'm going to come up with some suggestions on how we can move, but you don't have to do it. Just know that you don't have to do it. Just trust your body. If it doesn't feel right, skip it. It's not for you today. Just leave it. No worries. And if I'm around and you want to do something else, let me know, and I'm happy to offer you something else. So even just for allowing that space, so people don't feel awkward that they're not doing what the teacher said. The teacher doesn't know everything, knows very little. The student and the practitioner should be empowered to make their own decisions, right? And then teaching in stages and offering modifications, and is part of our task. I think that is a great evolution of the yoga practice, actually, because it used to be, I think, more rigid. In all styles were more rigid. Even yin used to be like no props yin, for example. And it was kind of like hardcore yin, and some people still teach it that way, but most people adapt it. And it's like, why not? Like if your elbows don't get to the floor, bring the floor to your elbows by adding 2 blocks. And so, but I would say that all the practices became more user-friendly.
Yeah, it's something that I've noticed as well in my time with practicing and teaching. I guess in some ways the practice itself has kind of become more open and adaptable, and maybe it's a natural consequence with more people practicing. Maybe a consequence of teachers who maybe have begun in a more rigid style starting to mature, for want of a better word, but kind of themselves being more open to adaptability. And for me, that's, as someone who came to the practice being rigid and not that flexible and struggling with a lot of traditional things, I think maybe 30 years ago, I probably wouldn't have lasted that long, because, as you said, a lot of practices like yin, even being very rigid in their approach. And unfortunately, that's just not the way it is in reality, that we all do inhabit slightly different bodies. We all have different backgrounds, and that doesn't mean that, okay, I think I remember you saying before in one of these trainings that I was on, that a lot of people said, oh, they got hurt through yoga. Oh, I practiced, I don't know, I got an injury by doing yoga. And you kind of made the point, well, no, it's not yoga that hurt you. It was the way that you were doing the yoga. Like the practice in itself is almost very like depersonalized. It's how you approach it that gives you the benefits or not. And I do think in general, the community of yoga is getting so much better at being adaptable and accommodating and welcoming to non-traditional types of practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And that's something that as it grew and more people from all walks of life started coming, I think the students are changing the teachers, and that is the other part of the dialogue. That is really good. That the people are changing the way we're becoming much more aware of how people learn, actually. And when you've been teaching for a number of years, learning that less is more, that people sometimes celebrate or communicate or express the best experiences out of something that was actually quite simple. Yeah. And then as a teacher, you sometimes you try to, challenge yourself and as a vinyasa teacher to create great sequences and to create sequences that enable people to go into deep poses or to master this and that, when for someone may have been, just a good shavasana. Yeah.
I think that's a nice note to end things on. Thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation. I've learned a lot. Learned a lot from our short time talking. And maybe the final little thing is we're lucky enough to have you coming over in April for your Yin training. And do you want to take a few moments to maybe give people a little idea of maybe what to expect from the training?
So, well, first of all, thank you for the invitation, for your time. Always a pleasure to chat with you and to find a way to connect to the community over there in Dublin. It's been every visit. It's been actually a memorable one. I love seeing what's happening there. So yes, I'm coming. And to teach training on Yin is going to be a 30-hour training, a bit of an immersion for some people into the practices of Yin and into the teachings of the Tao Te Ching. I use that Chinese text. We use it in the training. We read through it and share insights from the text, and immersion into the practice and giving some tools on how to take it into a home practice or how to bring some Yin into the Yang classes. So one of the things that we explore is different ways that you can combine Yin and Yang, or Yang and Yin, or Yin, Yang, Yin. And there are creative ways to play with the two in ways that actually, if we're talking about community-driven and making it easy for people, if someone wants to experience the different energies of Yin and Yang, offering those classes, and they tend to do quite well at certain times in the schedule of yoga studios, offering the Yin and the Yang, a bit of a combination. Mm-hmm. So that's the plan. We're going to look into the anatomy part is the myofascial meridians. It's a little intro into the system. So there's a bit of everything, and I'm looking forward to coming over and connecting with this special community.
We're very excited to have you. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to have this conversation, Nico. Really do appreciate it. And we're looking forward to seeing you in person very, very soon.
Thank you, Brian. And looking forward to seeing you soon.